Protests and action along the border.
I just think we have reached a level of horror around these migrant children, and it anguished me as a mom.
Reports of poor conditions for children in Texas detention centers lead to a response from citizens and Congress. Immigration issues also spark a fiery exchange between the two Texans running for president. Millions watching saw the conflict, but did it help or hurt their campaigns?
I just think it's a mistake, Bethel. I think it's a mistake.
But you're looking at just one small part of this. I'm talking about a comprehensive rewrite of our immigration laws.
Millions watching saw the conflict, but did it help or hurt their campaigns? Hello and thank you for joining us for State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. More than 15 million Americans tuned in this week to watch each night of the Democratic presidential debates. That brought new attention to the two Texans running for the nomination. Both Julian Castro and Beto O'Rourke took on questions about immigration, and their answers led to one of the most memorable moments in the debate.
We would not detain any family fleeing violence, in fact, fleeing the deadliest countries on the face of the planet today. We would implement a family case management program so they could be cared for in the community at a fraction of the cost. And then we would rewrite our immigration laws in our own image. Free dreamers forever from any fear of deportation by making them U.S. citizens here in this country. Invest in solutions in Central America. Work with regional stakeholders so there's no reason to make that 2,000-mile journey to this country.
Secretary, I'll give you 30 seconds.
Let's be very clear. The reason that they're separating these little children from their families is that they're using Section 1325 of that act, which criminalizes coming across the border, to incarcerate the parents and then separate them. Some of us on this stage have called to end that section, to terminate it. Some, like Congressman O'Rourke, have not. And I want to challenge all of the candidates to do that. I just think it's a mistake, Bethel. I think it's a mistake, and I think that if you truly want to change the system, then we got to repeal that section. If not, then it might as well be the same policy.
Let me respond to this very briefly. Actually, as a member of Congress, I helped to introduce legislation that would ensure that we don't criminalize those who are seeking asylum and refuge in this country. If you're fleeing desperation, then I want to make sure that you're treated with respect.
I'm still talking about everybody else.
But you're looking at just one small part of this. I'm talking about a comprehensive rewrite of our immigration laws. And if we do that, I don't think it's asking too much for people to follow our laws when they come to this country. I'm talking about millions of folks. A lot of folks that are coming are not seeking asylum. A lot of them are undocumented immigrants, right? And you said recently that the reason you didn't want to repeal Section 1325 was because you were concerned about human trafficking and drug trafficking. But let me tell you what. Section 18, Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Title 21, and Title 22 already cover human trafficking. I think that you should do your homework on this issue. If you did your homework on this issue, you would know that we should repeal this section.
Night two of the debates featured the frontrunners in the polls, former Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Bernie Sanders. The most memorable moment came from an exchange between Biden and California Senator Kamala Harris. She spoke directly to Biden about how she, as a young girl, was impacted by busing for school integration. Biden defended his record on civil rights, but the exchange brought new questions about his ability to appeal to a diverse group of voters. Democrats in Austin came together for a watch party for both debates. Age was an issue that came up on the second night. Senator Sanders and former VP Biden are pushing 80. Harris, Eric Swalwell, and Pete Buttigieg are much younger. Swalwell flat out told Biden to step aside to let younger candidates take the lead. The voters watching in Austin told us age is a factor, but not the primary factor in choosing a candidate.
Can they physically do the job, or are they able, or are they mentally fit to do it, and do they resonate with different generations?
Experience, like past voting records between Bernie and Biden, they're so different. So it's not just age, it's also like what they've done in their lifetime and what they're planning to do in the future.
Fresh off the debates, the two Texans in the race brought their campaigns back to the Lone Star State. Beto O'Rourke and Julian Castro held separate rallies Friday night in Austin, just a few blocks apart from each other. Politics reporter Phil Prazen has a closer look.
Coming off a boost from the first Democratic debate, former San Antonio Mayor Julian Castro threw a jab at fellow Texan, former El Paso Congressman Beto O'Rourke.
A few months ago, they were writing me up as the other Texan, but that is no more. I am the Texan in this race.
Castro is looking to go up in the polls at the expense of O'Rourke.
I can hold my own when I'm challenged and come out the winner. That's what I did on Wednesday.
A spokesman from O'Rourke's campaign told me while there are 2 Texans in the race, only one visited all 254 Texas counties and received more votes than any other Democrat in state history, referring to O'Rourke.
We will define this country, not by our fears, not by whom we are going to exclude.
O'Rourke's event Friday did have a larger crowd. Both candidates are in Austin on their way to tour the immigration detention facilities in Houston and El Paso.
There will be a reckoning and an accounting for this moment. If not from this generation, then from the next one. They will want to know what we did when this was happening.
Donald Trump wants us to believe that the folks that are coming toward the United States border, little children mostly and their mothers, are a national security threat. I don't buy into that BS.
This race will also split local politicians, backing their choice and fighting against one another. Travis County Commissioner Jeff Trevelyan introduced Beto. Cedar Park State Representative John Busey introduced Julian Castro. The race between the 2 Texans heats up in their home state. Phil Prazen for State of Texas.
Texas Democrats cheered on the candidates, but it's important to note their party is outnumbered by registered Republicans in the state, and a lot of folks on the red team were not impressed by the candidates.
Certainly, their stances on a lot of issues, be it guns, abortion, a 70% tax rate for upper and middle income, isn't stuff that Texans identify with.
Right now, it's Democrats trying to impress Democrats. So they're going as far to the left as they possibly can, or as far to the center as they possibly can, but people are taking notes tonight. And when we get into the general election between Trump and whoever the nominee ends up being, we're going to remember what was said tonight and how it doesn't line up with the values of mainstream Americans.
This was just the first in a series of presidential debates. Round 2 comes up at the end of July with a pair of debates in Detroit.
Emotions run high in our nation's capital as lawmakers debate emergency aid to help with the crisis at the border.
There is nothing that we wouldn't do for our children. Nothing to give them a better life.
How a heartbreaking image helped lead to action to help people at the border. First, 2 big Supreme Court decisions. The rulings could determine who wins political power across the country, how the impact will be felt here in Texas.
Two big decisions from the U.S. Supreme Court will have significant impact here in Texas. First, the judges ruled 5-4 that federal courts cannot overturn legislative maps drawn to favor one political party over another. That's commonly known as gerrymandering. The justices considered challenges out of North Carolina and Maryland on maps politicians consider unfair. Supreme Court justices said they would not step in to stop maps drawn to favor Republicans or Democrats, which, remember, are private organizations. They'll only step in if it favors white people over minority races. That's a big deal here in Texas. State lawmakers draw new maps after every census. The census is next year, so the next election will determine who gets to draw those maps for the next 10 years. Right now, both houses of the legislature are led by Republicans, but Democrats are only 9 seats away from taking over power in the House. The Supreme Court also ruled against adding a citizenship question to the U.S. Census, at least for now. The Trump administration proposed adding the question to get data to enforce the Federal Voting Rights Act. The court ruled that explanation did not justify having the question on the census. The ruling left an opening to allow the question if the administration gives an acceptable rationale. Some groups, like the Nonpartisan League of Women Voters, worry a citizenship question would discourage both non-citizens and immigrants from filling out the census. That could prevent some communities from getting the right amount of federal funding and political representation. Larger cities could see the biggest impact, but others, like the Travis County Republican Party, are in favor of the question.
If you don't think taxpayer dollars and government services should go to non-citizens to the same extent that they go to citizens, then we have to be able to distinguish between the two categories.
President Trump asked lawyers to delay the census, but it's not clear if that will happen. The federal government said they want to begin printing the census questionnaire by July.
Children sleeping on concrete floors.
Concerns about conditions at a Texas facility holding migrant children lead to action on Capitol Hill, and regular citizens are also stepping up.
We have reached a level of horror around these migrant children, and it anguished me as a mom.
But the people who run the place tell a different story, how the fight over the facility could bring more resources to help the crisis on the border.
Protesters bring new attention to conditions at a Texas facility that holds migrant children. Immigrant rights advocates rallied Thursday outside the U.S. Border Patrol station in Clint, just outside of El Paso. The protesters say children inside the facility are getting sick because of crowded, unsanitary conditions. That was one of several protests outside the facility as reports spread about the conditions for children. A small group held a peaceful vigil Wednesday night. A woman drove 17 hours to get there after hearing reports about conditions inside.
The children are not being cared for at all, right? No hygiene, no toothbrush, no diapers for the little ones. I just think we have reached a level of horror around these migrant children, and it anguished me as a mom. So I thought, I need to try to do something. What can I do?
But the Border Patrol says the children are fine. Officials say reports of unsanitary conditions are overblown. The Border Patrol let reporters inside the facility to show their side of the story.
It was a decision made at the headquarters level. They thought it was important for the press to see what's actually happening here. So by opening the doors and letting you see it, I think it's an important part to provide some balance to the story that is being told, without her voice.
Media groups that toured the Clint facility were not allowed to bring their cameras in. One CNN reporter told what he saw.
From what I saw inside the Clint Border Patrol station, from my vantage point, was not unconscionable. But it is worth pointing out the legal monitors that visited this very same facility last week visited a facility that had about 250 children in it. Today, there was 117, and it was well over capacity. In the processing center, we saw a total of 9 cells. Some cells had between 20 and 24 child migrants in them, some who looked like they had been through some very hard days recently. There was one child I saw with red, bloodshot eyes, another who appeared to be sick with yellow eyes but wasn't quarantined. I did see one person who was quarantined, a teenage girl who had the flu and was in a cell by herself. Perhaps the most heartbreaking thing that we saw were children that were sleeping on mats, 1-inch thick mats, because there wasn't enough space on the cots inside of these cells. We were also transferred to a Sallyport area that was an extension of this facility. CBP says Customs and Border Protection say they had to extend it because they're dealing with a historic influx of minors. One story I do want to relay to you is I heard a teenage girl on the phone with her family telling them that she was still alive, saying, "Estoy vivo, estoy vivo."
The controversy over children in the Clint facility helped move forward debate on an emergency aid bill to address the crisis on the border. But one heartbreaking image pushed lawmakers to finally act. The picture seen around the world shows the bodies of a father and his daughter drowned in the Rio Grande near Brownsville. It stirred strong emotions in Congress, including from a Texan who represents the El Paso area.
The photograph that all of us saw this week should tear all of us up. For those of us who are parents, to see a toddler with her little arms wrapped around the neck of her father. There is nothing that we wouldn't do for our children, nothing to give them a better life. Oscar and Valeria represent tens of thousands of migrants who have died as they have tried to build a better life for themselves, only to find that they are demonized and locked out of the promise that those of us who are natural-born citizens are so fortunate to enjoy.
House members held a moment of silence after Escobar spoke. Escobar and other progressive Democrats tried to change a bipartisan humanitarian aid bill passed by the Senate. They wanted to reduce funding for ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Progressives also wanted tighter restrictions on how long children could be kept in temporary custody, but the plan died amid a bipartisan call to act quickly. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi pushed forward with a vote on the original Senate plan. It passed, bringing $4.6 billion in emergency aid, including funds to care for migrants at the border.
If you did your homework on this issue, you would know that we should repeal this section.
Two Texans spar on the presidential debate stage. It was memorable, but did it help either candidate?
Castro needed those split-screen moments where he was going toe-to-toe with either Elizabeth Warren or Beto O'Rourke, and he got exactly what he needed.
We turn to our panel for insight into the debate and the prospects for candidates trying to win your vote.
About human trafficking and drug trafficking, but let me tell you what, Section 18, Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Title 21 and Title 22 already cover human trafficking. I think that you should do your homework on this issue. If you did your homework on this issue, you would know that we should repeal this section. This is an issue that we should.
A sparring match between two Texans created a memorable moment in the presidential debates, but was it enough to make either candidate stand out from the field? For some perspective on the debate, we turn to our roundtable. Jeremy Wallace covers politics for the Houston Chronicle, and Carlos Sanchez is the news and politics editor for Texas Monthly. Welcome.
Oh, thanks.
Good to have you.
So let's talk about those two Texans. Did they do anything for their campaigns, you think?
I would say yes. I think Julian Castro did very well for his campaign, and the mark is the money. We got some information from the Castro campaign this morning that donations tripled the day after he appeared on the debate. I don't know what happened on Beto's side, but I think there was a great round of criticism with regard to his performance.
Yeah, he certainly took a lot more heat for not, like, Beto O'Rourke is really good at a lot of things in politics. The one thing we haven't seen yet is all of that translate into a debate stage. He can, win a town hall, he can, slay it with Oprah Winfrey and Ellen DeGeneres, but he yet has not figured out how to bring all of that same kind of Beto-mania onto the stage for a 30-second or 60-second response. And so we're kind of looking for that. And you see with Castro needed to look like he was on the same plane as Beto, because Beto's ahead in the polls. He's at the 2% that everybody is going to need to get into the next round of debates. Right now, everybody can be on that debate stage. But when you get to the fall, candidates have to get 2% in the polls, and they have to have 130,000 individual donations. And Beto's there already. Castro's not. So Castro needed those split-screen moments where he was going toe-to-toe with either Elizabeth Warren or Beto O'Rourke, and he got exactly what he needed.
And I think in the case of Julian, he is a policy wonk by nature, but he can't convey that policy wonkishness. I think he needs to convey, his challenge was to convey a sense of humanity while showing his policy credentials, and I think he was able to do that.
And what's impressive about that was, like, Beto had those previous two statewide debates. Julian Castro hasn't had a statewide debate to kind of prep for something like this. This is something entirely different. I mean, you get on this national stage, you don't know where the questions are coming from, how to get your lines in there without sounding like they were forced. And I think all around Castro did pretty well in doing all of that. He got parts of his biography out and answers that you wouldn't have expected. I thought he did good explaining to people he was the mayor of the city of San Antonio. He brought up his HUD time. He brought up how he got to the country and how his family got to the country and his upbringing. That's a lot to squeeze in a 60-second answer, and he did it about as well as anybody on the last 2 days of debates.
Going into the debate, Biden was showing up in the polls as really resonating with Texans a lot. Do you think that he did anything to keep that support, or did he lose it?
I think that Biden did well in the polls because of the phenomena that most candidates, when they do well in the polls, is he's a known entity. And it's as simple as that. I think that when people begin to dig deeper, the electorate in particular, that's when the polls start to shift and the numbers start to change. I think Biden had a huge target on his back the second night of the debate, and he didn't handle that target very well.
Yeah, he still distinguishes himself because he doesn't look like the most liberal person on stage. Every time, a question came to him, it didn't feel like he felt like the people on the left were saying, hey, he doesn't go far enough left, right? And I think that can benefit him down the road in Texas, where it's going to be clear he is not, Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders or one of those people. So I think that still exists. That's still out there. You remember, for all the Republicans in Texas, there's a whole big bunch of them that did not want President Trump in the first place, and so they're going to be looking for somebody. If I don't, I don't want to. I'm uncomfortable with President Trump. I'm going to vote for somebody else. Biden still has a lot of the pieces that would be able to attract those people. I don't think he said anything, in the first debate that would suggest that that's not going to be available to him when we get down, closer to it.
What happens next? What do you think is going to happen going forward?
Well, I think the big challenge right now is it's the opposite challenge of Republicans. When you're in the primary, you want to lean right, and now this field is leaning extremely far to the left. And that may bode well for the primary, but it could come back to haunt them for the general election.
Yeah, and there's a lot of road ahead, right? This is another debate in a month. You have like the Iowa State Fair. All these little things are going to help start winnowing this field. Back when the Republicans had their debates back in 2016, everybody was talking about how great Chris Christie did on the first night. What happened? Nothing came out of that. It's like, so the question for Castro is, can he build off of his good performance long enough to get him into the fall where he can really start trading punches, with some of the top candidates?
All right, guys, we're in it now. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And thank you again for joining us for State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. We'll be back next week to bring you an in-depth look at Texas politics.